Barcelona's financial woes have been well documented. However, with debts continuing to spiral, the mismanagement is starting to affect the women's team. And now a team with unparalleled success over the last 2 years are losing stars rapidly. So what's going on, why is this happening, and what next for Barcelona Femení? Let's dive into it. So let's start by talking about Barcelona's finances, Barcelona as a whole, Harry. There've been a decade now of financial mismanagement, hasn't it?
Yeah, this was a problem that everyone could have seen coming, and it has been a problem for the last few years. It was a stem from the men's side, to be honest. But yeah, Barcelona as a whole have terrible management of finances. I've never seen a football club like it. And for the last few years, as everyone's been, putting out these warnings and speculating about where they are with their finances and what are they doing, they've been going out and spending more and spending more and spending more, and obviously all the jokes that Laporta and that Co keep finding money behind their sofa, because that is what it's felt like. They've had all these problems over the last few years. They keep going out and spending, and it feels it's finally caught up to them, and unfortunately their way of dealing with it seems to also be impacting the women's side. So Barcelona as a whole are in a lot of trouble right now, and I think that now, frustratingly and unfortunately, we are starting to see that problem, because it's become such an issue with the men's side. It is now leaking into the women's side, and it's all become very messy, and it's a big shame. But it's a situation that we could have seen coming a while off, and they've failed to deal with it. They've failed to recognise it, and now it feels that Barcelona, men and women, are in a very difficult situation.
And I think the problem for Barcelona now is that they're running out of other people's money to spend, because they don't have any of their own money. They keep spending other people's money, and they can't repay them. So to discuss briefly what has happened, I mean, there's definitely financial experts who give a much broader take, or a much more well explained take, but we could discuss some of the details. So it stemmed from 2015. They won the Champions League in 2015. Any fans of the men's team will remember that. Obviously Guardiola. Oh no, that was Enrique. Sorry, Guardiola's gone, but that was Enrique winning it. And after that, they had this hugely bloated wage bill, and that was a huge problem. They couldn't afford their own wage bill, and that was part of why we saw a few years later Neymar leave for 200 million. Now you'd think a club that made 200 million pounds on one transfer would be in a very healthy position. But since then, it's just got worse. They have had some terrible transfer business over the last decade. Signings of upwards of £100 million that have been let go for less than 30, which is a very bad takeaway, very bad recovery from those deals. So and those players didn't perform for them on the pitch. Players like Antoine Griezmann, players like Felipe Coutinho, players like Ousmane Dembele, who have all gone on to have very good careers, or have had good careers before then, but just didn't play well at Barcelona. So that was a real concern. Additionally, their new stadium, which they've started building, it feels like forever ago at this point, was initially expected to cost €900 million. However, with the COVID pandemic, with delays to construction, with amendments to how they're building the stadium, it's gone on to cost an extra €100 million every year, and it's now rumoured to be about 1.5 billion. So that's an extra €600 million on a stadium that should have been built a very long time ago at this point. And the problem for all of this is that during COVID, they didn't have any ticket sales, they didn't have any match day revenue, they didn't have as many shirts as that sort of stuff. There was a huge hit there where they still had to pay their players. You'll remember a lot of them had to be furloughed and stuff like that. A lot of them had to accept wage cuts. And that was a huge problem for Barcelona. They stopped making money in that time. And then since then, because the new camp's been being built, they haven't been able to play games there. So they've been playing games at the reserve stadium, which is half the capacity. And so this has massively impacted how Barcelona have been able to make revenue. And they now sit at a debt of €1.3 billion. And that's very difficult to clamber out of that hole. So it's going to be interesting what they try and do. One thing they're trying to do is changing the budget. So the way that FFP, financial fair play, works in Spain, this differs to over here in England and in the UWCL, but the difference is that the women's side's revenue and losses they impact the men's side's financial fair play. So if the women's team makes a profit, that obviously benefits the men's side. But if the women's team spend any money, that reflects negatively on the men's team. So there is that problem. Now that's different to England. In England, the two things are kept separate in terms of financial fair play. Obviously, everyone spends out of the same pot, unless obviously you sell your women's club, which we've seen a lot of teams do to try and get around financial fair play rules. But it doesn't factor into FFP. So you can spend that money, but it doesn't factor into FFP. And that's the big problem, because Barcelona have been spending this money so rampantly. There are now restrictions in place to stop them spending money, and they've had to cut budgets across the board. So this has included the women's team budget. And that's why we've seen players go so quickly for so cheap prices. The problem at the moment is Barca have to get their budgets down. So it's not just about getting transfer money in. And this is where I think some people have been misled or misunderstand the situation, where they've said, well, why are Barcelona letting these players leave for free rather than keeping them and selling them? That will get the 1 million. But it's not about the transfer fee necessarily. It's also about being able to sustain it with wages. So actually the cheaper thing to do, especially when other European clubs know Barcelona's financial situation, the cheaper thing to do is to terminate the contracts and just cut their wages immediately, rather than let them keep earning a wage while you try and sell them. So that's why we've seen a lot of players go. But we've seen Ellie Roebuck leave to Aston Villa after just a year at the club. We've seen Ingrid Engen go to direct rivals in Olympique Lyonnais, who obviously are, Barca's biggest rivals, or have been for the last 5 years in the Champions League. We've seen Fridolina Rolfö go. She's still without a club. We've seen Martina Fernandez go. She's gone to Everton. We've seen Jana Fernandez has just gone. She's going to London City. All in all, they've cut their squad to just 17 players. Harry, that's not enough to have a team. They can't even fill a bench.
No, that isn't enough to play football. But as you say, the other sides around Europe, especially the big sides and the likes of Michel Kang, have been licking their lips because they are seeing an opportunity to go and pinch players off Barcelona. But it's put themselves in a very, very difficult situation, and they shouldn't be there. No football team should be a month out from the season starting, less than that, and only have 17 players that are actually playing for them.
Particularly one who've won the Liga F so many times consecutively, who have won the Champions League many times in the last few years. A team of that pedigree and that caliber shouldn't have financial problems, because they've been making everything in prize money. They should be the richest women's team, not the team that've got to cut their squad so dramatically.
And it's difficult for them, because that's the thing, as you say, they should be earning loads of money. They have earned loads of money, and that money should be being contributed to the women's side, and they should now be enjoying the fact that they could buy loads of world-class players and keep dominating. Instead, that money has gone to the new camp and other positions and other places in the men's side, and the women's side have kind of been left with nothing. And that's half the problem, is that it's a shame to see the women's side be put on the back burner once again. One of the most successful sides in the world, the best side currently in Europe at the very least, and Barcelona have just put them on the back burner because of the financial struggles. And it's a massive loss to still see, with all the positivity that comes forward, that at the end of the day, when sides are in trouble, the women's side just gets not forgotten about, because they can't forget about it because it's leaking them money, but just they become the backup to sort all their financial troubles out. And it's a real shame, because it's ruining what is an incredible footballing side. And as you say, if Barcelona walk into this season with 17 players, they might even lose more if it carries on. Suddenly, they're not going to win. They're not going to win anything. They might get the Liga F, but in the Champions League, they won't stand a chance because they don't have a squad. And it's a real shame. Obviously, they've got no one in the B side either. I think that's down to only just in double digits. So it's not even like you can say they'll promote the youth and fill the squad out. It's because the B side's gone as well. So on Barcelona women's books, there are not enough players to play a full campaign of football, and that's a very difficult situation to be in. And I feel for the women's side, because it's not their fault. And as Barcelona as a whole, I don't feel for them, because this should have been a situation that they saw coming and should have dealt with it years ago. But now it's a real shame to see that it's impacting the women's side, and it's had a massive impact off the pitch, and that can only lead to on-pitch complications with the lack of players that could actually play for them.
Especially when their men's side has so many homegrown players they could sell. And I understand the emotional side of La Masia. You want to have the players come through the youth team and then play for the first team, but those players would sell for pure profit in terms of FFP conversations. So selling one of those solves a lot of this problem, and yet the women's side now has to cut their budget by a further €1 million. And so where does that come from? Because they haven't got any more players to let go. They barely have a squad as it is. So it's a huge problem. I think it is a reflection of how the women's game is still viewed in Spain. You've only got to look at the RFEF and who they've appointed in the last 3 attempts at appointing a manager for the Spain national team. And you had Jorge Vilda, who, by all reports, was a very abusive manager by what we've heard come out in the media. They've had Montse Tomé, who I don't think was fit for that role. And now they've got Bernardet, who is not a manager who should be managing the best team in the world. She has no experience at that level. I know she's done the youth sides, but for me, that's not enough to say she's going to come in and be a guaranteed success with this team. And it's the best team internationally. That is, at this point in time, an inarguable fact. But I think what we saw in that final was that they haven't got a manager who can help them raise that level to be able to win everything. And they won the World Cup, and the players did very well to do that, but you need a manager there as well. And I think it's reflected in the RFEF, their former president, Luis Rubiales, and obviously we saw everything that came out against him. He's now disgraced and not allowed to be the president anymore. And it's just a reflection of how the women's game is still tracked in Spain, the lack of investment to clubs that aren't Barcelona, and now even Barcelona, who are one of the best teams in the world, if not the best team in the world. And yeah, I think it's horrible to see this situation. But one of the things that could easily solve this, and this is something at the moment that Barcelona are lobbying for, is that women's team spending doesn't count or shouldn't count towards men's FFP. And if that does come through, then we might see Barcelona in January be able to spend some more. They may be able to bring some players in to make up the losses. But at the moment, they're going into a season with 17 players. That's not enough, surely, to go and compete.
No, it's not. As you say, there's a reason England split those budgets. It's because that, yes, if one that, say Chelsea, for example, if the Chelsea men's side were to go to massive FFP problems, yes, Todd Boehly might put all his money into that, and the women's side might lose a little bit of investment, but they won't be in such a dire situation where they have to cut loads of money. They can keep doing what they're doing because as long as they're sticking to their budget, they're absolutely fine. By merging them into one, trying to run, because and this is where it comes from, is that in England, both sides are very, like Chelsea men and Chelsea women are treated like two different clubs, and that is how they should be. They are two different football teams. They should be ran as such, especially now that Chelsea have obviously sold them on, and like Villa have done the same, and other clubs have copied. But what they're trying to do in Spain with the FFP budgets is run two football clubs or two football teams off of one FFP budget, and that's a very, very difficult thing to do. And I obviously it is possible. All the other sides are doing it, but for Barcelona, because they're spending more money, because they are the best side in the world, and they are competing at a very high level in both the men's and the women's campaigns, this was kind of bound to happen. So obviously the amount of spending is ludicrous, and the way they've gone about it and the way that they've dealt with the situation has been terrible. But to be honest, it's a situation that was always going to happen when you've got two sides that need to be putting money in and need to be investing well. Trying to run them off the same budget was never really going to work, and I do kind of understand from that point why they are trying to get them to split the FFP budgets.
Yeah, and the other thing that by splitting them it does in England is it encourages the owners to invest in those clubs. Now obviously there's going to be some who don't do that, as we've seen at Manchester United, but broadly, if the owners have got the money there and you can't spend it on the men's team because there's an FFP gap in there, budget cut, so you can't spend too much money on the men's side, then why not invest in the women's side and hope for some sort of kickback? And this is the problem with Barcelona, and this is why you say, oh well, all the other clubs in the Liga F deal with it by not investing in their women's team anywhere near the standard.
True.
Real Madrid don't pay transfer fees. They just get players in on frees. And yes, they've got a very decent side now, but is it one that's going to be able to compete with Barcelona? Maybe now, because Barcelona aren't going to have enough players to see out the season. If they get a single injury, it's they're going to have a backup goalkeeper up front or something mental. So it's a very tough situation now for Barcelona. But yeah, the budget should be split. It would encourage more of the owners, because at the moment the problem for the owners is if you sit there and from a financial perspective go, well, yes, we can invest in the women's team, but then we've got to cut spending to the men's team, or we've got to cut spending from somewhere else in the club. It becomes more of a financial decision, and in that you have to be, as the owner of the football club, you have to consider what's your most profitable entity. Unfortunately, as much as we'd love to sit here and go, we want to see more investment in women's football, but ultimately, from their perspective as business owners, they have to protect their most profitable entity. And so the problem that creates a problem, because then they can't invest in those teams to the scale. Even if they wanted to, they have to make the right business decisions. So by separating the FFP budgets, by making sure the women's one doesn't have an impact on the men's FFP, you would create a situation where more clubs in La Liga, hopefully, would then invest in their Liga F sides, and the women's game would grow in Spain as a consequence. At the moment, it's an afterthought, and that's got to change. We need to see more investment in Spain on the clubs. Talking Champions League, Barcelona with 17 players, surely they can't win it.
Yeah, it puts themselves in a very, very tough place because, as you say, I don't think you can... Yes, they've still got the core squad, and yes, the starting 11 overall has got the quality to win the Champions League, but as we've seen so much, even when Barcelona won it, when Arsenal won it last year, when Barcelona won it a couple of years ago, or even when Barcelona got to the final last year, how crucial having a whole squad can be. The amount of games we saw across last campaign where in the group stage you see the rotated 11s come in and get the job done because you want to rest your big players. That won't be able to happen for Barcelona because they don't have any rotation players. When you get deeper into the competition and you need players to come off the bench and make a difference, that isn't going to happen because they haven't got that many players, they haven't got that many options. So I think that we always say this about knockout football. We said it about this international stage, but also the domestic stage. You win those kind of competitions based on your squad, because in those games you're going to need players who can make a difference off the bench. You're going to be players that can come on, because if you're going all the way to penalties, you're going to need players you can. You get 5 subs now. Barcelona can barely put 5 subs on their bench, 5 outfielders that can come on. So it does put themselves in a difficult situation, especially with the fact that some of their best players like Engen have gone off to Lyon, and that's a team they're going to be competing directly against the Champions League with. But I just think I think Barcelona, they're up against it now. Liga F, they should be okay because, as you say, unless Real Madrid sit there and go, let's just go throw loads of money at it and try and win the league, I don't see that happening. But 100% in Europe, they're in a difficult situation because Lyon, Chelsea, Arsenal are all putting the pressure on them now, and Arsenal's reigning champions will want to go and do it again. So I do think Barcelona now are in a very difficult spot to go and get that European title back, because I just don't see it happening. Even the starting 11, as I said, are good enough to win the game, but you need players that can make a difference, and the game is constantly changing across those 90 minutes. If you haven't got players on the bench that can come on and make a difference, then that can cost you in knockout football.
I think the only way I can see Barca winning everything this season, or anything for that matter, is if they get the rule change passed before January, or if they sort some finances out before January, and then they're able to invest in the squad. Because I think the 17 players they've got are good enough to get them through the Champions League group stage. Now, I know that obviously the amount of games in the Champions League is the same, but you're going to get a wider variety in quality levels. They're going to play 2 weaker sides, 2 middling sides, probably 2 stronger sides. It all depends on how they're seeding it, but which we haven't had explicit information on just yet. But because of the new format, there are going to be some tougher games in there, but they should get themselves through. Probably still in the top 4, but even if they are in the next lot, I think they'd get themselves through to the playoffs, which would be very winnable if they can invest in January. So it's all going to be up in there. They've just got to try and compete as well as they can with the players they've got. They've still got an incredibly good first 11. It's still the highest wage bill in Europe, I believe, or at least it was. It may now be behind Chelsea, but they're still. That's the thing, that because their players earn so much, they need that investment, which they get through sponsorships, which they get through tournament prize money from winning everything over the last few years. But they can't spend that because it's all counts towards the men's team, and that's a real shame. But that does round up today's video, the crisis at Barcelona Femeni. Hopefully, we hate to see this. As much as I will happily laugh at them failing on the pitch, we are fans of the English game. I think that is fine. And there is that healthy rivalry. You never want to see a club taken apart like this because of something out of their control. So I think as football fans, we can sympathise with that. Hopefully, there's a resolution to the situation soon. That is everything for us today, though. Thank you guys very much for watching. If you want to check out more, there's a video on screen now where we look at Olivia Smith's move to Arsenal, whether she's the right fit and what she's going to bring to the side. Go and check that out now. That, though, is everything for us today. Thank you guys very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.